All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to another WBL Institute session. We're so glad that you have been able to join us today, and you're in the right place if you are here for the 54-hour requirement WBL Grid Map Orientation Revisited. We are going to overview some things that we did last quarter that we actually provided this topic, but there are some updates. So we wanted to make sure you're aware of those. So for everyone who's here, welcome. For those of you coming in for the first time, what took you so long? And for those of you who have been coming consistently, thank you so much for your support. So we will be moving forward, and I guess latecomers will just join us as they can. So moving to the next slide. Once again, you're here through the WBL Institute. This is the landing page. We're not going to change it. We want people to be comfortable getting in and registering. We continue to rely on Eventbrite so that we can collect important data as to who is actually benefiting from these resources. So it's very important that we capture your information before you get your tickets. Hopefully everybody has figured out the process, and we do want to make sure as well that we are able to go back and see those schools who have been participating, as some of you guys actually have noted in your Perkins 5 focus, either equity and access or special populations. So this is one way that we're able to see whether or not you're able to be served based on your focus for this year. So moving to the next slide. Myself and Larry are going to be leading the presentation, but then we're also going to have Kendall Samlal, Director of Program Approval, and the Program Approval and Quality team to tell us a little bit more detail and to answer some questions that you guys have about some of the information that is going to be rolled out today. The PAQ team is in close collaboration with NYSED and gets updates before any of us do. So I think they are always the best to message, some of those things that have been updated so far. So moving again to the next slide, we're going to follow our typical agenda, go through the norms. We're going to present the map and grid one more time. We also have an additional document that has been created newly for the rest of the year. And then we will open it up to Q&A and point you to the resources as we usually do. So thank you, Larry, for doing the behind the scenes work. The meeting norms. As usual, we want everybody to participate, whether that means that you are listening actively or asking questions. We want to make sure that by the time you leave the session, you feel like you have a good grasp of the content. We want to have people, if we do ever have breakouts, be present in those breakouts. We do encourage you to speak up live or engage in the chat, which a lot of you already are doing. And of course, before you leave, or at least directly after the workshop, we do need you to fill out that exit survey. It tells us how well we're doing. It tells us whether you still have questions. And most importantly, it tells us whether or not this has been a good use of your time. So we do appreciate all those folks who have been consistently filling out the exit surveys. And we want to make sure that we work together with folks from office hours as well to make sure that we're hitting all of the different points that you guys have put out there as your needs and your challenges. So starting off today, we are going to be talking through the map and the grid. So moving to the next slide. Just want to make sure that the objectives are clear for today. We want to outline the expectations from NYSED around the Perkins funding piece and why this actually impacts the information that we're providing today. We want to highlight the changes in acceptable work-based learning activity for this school year. As you guys know, there were many things that were made exceptions because of COVID, and we just want folks to be clear on those. And then lastly, we want to clarify the correct application of WBL experiences and the 54-hour requirement, which I know has tripped many of us up. Just hearing those 54 hours, I think puts folks into a tailspin. We want to make sure that you're clear on what that means and how it applies to you. And so moving to the next slide. Just pinning this back to the Perkins 5 priorities, through the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment, the CLNA, which Chrisanne has dived most deeply into in the last office hours that we had last week. We want to make sure that folks understand that the funding should directly be supporting the priority projects for this school year, which are work-based learning and equity and access. So under the work-based learning expectation, we need to strengthen and expand equitable access to high quality work-based learning opportunities and enhance data systems to track key program outcomes aligned to Perkins performance indicators. So hence the rollout of CTS, and us being able to support you guys and making sure that even through the change to remote, you're still able to provide high quality opportunities to your students. And then second, equity and access, develop and institute targeted interventions to improve access, engagement, and program completion for all students, including special populations. We really want to see an uptick in the engagement and the completion of ELs, students with disabilities, and others who have struggled based on the data that we've received. And we do want to make sure that your programs are actually building in considerations and supports for those students, so that they too will have the same opportunities that all students do. So those two are the focus for this year. And the WBL Institute was created to help to make sure that we are providing the content that will enable you guys to hit those focuses. So moving to the next slide, the implications for work-based learning are that the outcomes funded through Perkins must align to NYSED validated work-based learning activities, and that's where the grid and the map come in. And then schools are encouraged to use these resources when planning programming internally and when coordinating services provided by intermediaries, as well as in any industry partners that you have. So hopefully these two resources will help to structure your WBL as you think about what counts, what doesn't count, and what really is helpful as students work toward post-secondary readiness. So moving to the next slide, the scope and sequence map was created specifically to highlight WBL activities now approved by NYSED. So we do know that there have been, as I said, COVID exceptions, and we want people to be very clear about what that looks like in real time, in person, remote. And then we also want to make sure that we are recommending activities based on the grade level and phase that students are in so that they will have a quality experience. We want to provide examples of how WBL activities can transition from in-person to remote, so that you guys have a better sense of how this is going to apply to you and your program. And then finally, we want to provide guidance on how to include a focus on engaging special populations. We do know that there are folks who are really adept at doing this, and then there are others who need a little bit of support. And so we have actually worked together with DIML and DSIS, two of our departments that focus on special populations, to be able to make sure that we are doing the right thing in providing you with recommendations for supporting those populations. So with that said, moving to the next slide, I will pass it over to my colleague, Larry Williams, who will go through the WBL scope and sequence map in a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Zakia, and good afternoon to everyone. So let me just click on this right here so we can all see it. And please, no worries if I skim over something and you don't catch it, because all of these resources will be shared with you at the end of the session. So as Takia mentioned, we're going to take a more detailed look at the work-based learning scope and sequence map. The scope and sequence map provides a clear path and context on how students should experience work-based learning by phase and by grade. So the columns on the far left of the scope and sequence map breaks down the WBL experience according to phases. So on the left-hand side in columns A, you'll notice it's career awareness, career exploration and planning, career preparation, career training. The second column showcases the recommended grade level the activities should be prioritized. So you'll notice for each one of them, like career awareness, it's ninth and 10th grade. The next three columns spell out the work-based learning activities and provide links with more information on those activities by providing information on the career readiness framework, CTE WBL experiences, and detailed information on those activities in the WBL activities grid, which Taki is going to go into a little bit later. The exposure of these tools to staff and students have set the pace on how students experience work-based learning. These are columns C, D, and E, and you'll just notice the links to what I'm mentioning are right underneath the names, and they are packed with all of the resources mentioned. The next two columns listed are columns indicating which activities are NICET approved and CDAW standard approved. Updated in those two columns, columns F and G, are the hyperlinks under the titles, which will take you to the how to apply work-based learning hours and experience document. Taki is also going to go into that a little bit later on. The next two columns are pretty much self-explanatory, the H and the I column. Those columns are the WBL activity and grade recommendations. And of course, these are, depending on your schools, these recommendations can change, but I think these are our recommendations that we're making for each activity. The remote activity modification column showcases a link which provides guidance on how to transition work-based learning from in-person to remote. That's column J. So, and Takia mentioned this earlier on, but because equity and access is one of our priorities, we want to make sure that you have a better guidance, resources, and tools in working with these populations. So for columns K and L, considerations for L's and considerations for students with, with students with disabilities, there are links embedded in both columns, and they're updated and provided by the Department of Multilingual Learners and the Department of Division and Specialized Instruction and Student Support. The purpose of putting all of these tools and resources in the map is to show how they all complement each other towards producing quality WBL activities.
So thank you, Larry, for just outlining that one more time. I did drop the link in the chat so folks can go through in real time if they haven't seen it already. And just to note that some of these links are embedded in the document. So the NYC Career Ready Framework, Career Ready, basically was a city initiative that looked to connect all of the different experiences that young people should have in terms of post-secondary preparation. And so all of these things fall neatly within that framework. We also have the CTL toolkit, which mentions a lot of these activities already and provides resources from the CTE team around how to really create those quality experiences, inclusive of ways to plan, how to engage your industry partner, creating exit tickets and post-activity assignments for your young people. So all of that is chalked into the toolkit. And then we also have the WBL activities grid, which can also be found linked through the map, which is what I will give you a little bit more detail on in terms of the NICET approved experiences for this year. And then we also have the NICET virtual and remote resources page, where the state has actually outlined exactly what it is that they will be doing to support you guys as you pivot to remote. So all these things are linked. And so moving to the next page, we're going to go ahead and get into the activities grid. I've also linked that in the chat. So if you can take a look at the screen, basically we have 3 tabs as a part of this document. So Larry, if you could go to the first tab titled Accepted WBL Activities. This was the original tab that was created through the PAQ team to really outline all of the activities that had been originally acceptable by NICET, inclusive of community service, internship, job shadows, mentoring, on-site projects, school-based enterprise, supervised clinical experience, youth apprenticeship, and then other, based on if your industry is one that may include additional activities that could be negotiated with NICET. So this document gives you the definition of the activity. It also goes into an example of what in person would look like in terms of how a young person would engage. It tells you whether it's valid for work based learning, what the documentation would be required. Similarly for CDOS, if you're trying to document this for CDOS, as well as how and if it's valid for CTE endorsement. And then in terms of the acceptable hours and what you can accumulate, there are some there is some guidance around that. Others are variable, which means that you probably should get in touch with PAQ, or if you're going up for approval, your manager would be able to better advise you as to how much time you would need to spend or students would need to spend doing a particular experience. So this is pretty detailed. It also includes modifications for remote learning. So, within specific industries, there are some pretty easy things that you can do to pivot if you haven't already, once your industry partner is willing and able to make those accommodations. Now, the middle tab, 0 hour supporting activities, are activities that also count in the sense of skills building and development and experience for young people, but they just don't necessarily count for hours when you're looking to add that up for the documentation piece. So, career days originally, guest speakers, elevator pitch, mock interviews, resume and cover letter development were things that were seen as stepping stones to actual validated hour activity. So it's obviously things that you definitely cannot, skip over with your young people, but they were things that were, I guess, hopeful that they would be supplementing whatever the main activity was. So, obviously you would need to do resume before you could get to an internship. You would need to do an elevator pitch before you could get to potentially a job shadow. And things of that nature. And so that was what was the original description of 0 hour supporting activities before COVID. Once COVID hit, we created a third column. It's called School Year 2021 COVID Exceptions. And that column actually showcases what NICET had been okay with blurring the lines on, because there were many folks who said, hey, we now do not have the ability to do a lot of these original accepted activities, or our industry partners are not going to be able to allow for students to come on the premises. What are some things we can do? How can we continue to provide, quality experiences and still gain the credit? And so, as of today, because these things haven't changed yet, career days are now acceptable. Mock interviews are now acceptable. Resume and cover letter development, as well as networking events, are all acceptable. The caveat is that there must be sustained interaction with the industry partner as a part of the experience. So, students who are doing these would have to, first of all, attendance would need to be taken. But second, there needs to be some proof that there is feedback and engagement and connection with industry as students go through these experiences. And there are examples here under the definition. So next to that column that says resume and cover letter development, it says that it will apply only if it involves industry professionals who assess and provide direct input to the students. The industry professionals will critique, identify necessary skills within the field of study, and help with writing both documents. This can count towards 30 minutes of WBL time. So there has to be a give and take between the student and the industry representative, and there has to be some type of skill development as a result of this particular activity. And I know many of you have created remote activities that fall within these lines. You have been able to successfully engage your industry partners and make it a useful activity for students. Most of you also have post activities that are going on in the classroom as a result of this activity with the industry partner. continuing to build on it and showcase how this actually counts toward work-based learning. So we just want to continue to reinforce that unless we hear otherwise, NICET is continuing to recognize these particular activities this year as also being credit bearing. No worries, Carl. If you got to jump off, you got to jump off. So we will have this recording for those of you who won't be able to stay the entire time. So hopefully you'll take advantage of that. So now if we move to the next slide, we're going to go through one of the, I think you skipped a slide, or we didn't refresh it, Larry, because we're going through the other one first. There we go. So we're going to go through another document that was created to really assist with how some of these activities look by industry. And I'm going to pass it back to my colleague, Larry.
Thanks, Akia. So we're calling this the WBL activity by industry tool. And we adapted this grid to be industry specific based on our pathways for our grades 9 to 14 schools. It's not a universal tool, but it's a tool that schools can use as they're planning out activities for next year. The activities are community service, internship, job shadows, mentoring, on-site projects, school-based enterprise, supervised clinical experiences, youth apprenticeship, career days, and network events. The activities examples that you can use the activity examples, you can use those to pull resources for your students. So if you look under activities examples, you'll see we actually have links to websites that people can use based on industry, just for resources of activities that they can use with their students. For each activity, depending on your industry sector, you can see what potential activity your students can experience. We also included a column here for remote modification examples, just to show how some of these activities translate to being used remotely. And then by sector, you can see examples based on industry. So it's not a list that encompasses all industries, but we wanted to share with you because it is something that can be built out, or it can also actually be useful as is. So just looking at community service, and I'm just going to highlight one, information technology. So based on community service, for IT, we have getting involved in IT communities such as Reddit to learn about how people from all over the world work together to solve problems. These were just some of the things that we came up with that you can experience with your students, but it's not something that's engraved in stones. It is something that you can build out based on things that you've already been doing with your students. So this is a document that we will share, but it's also something that you can add on to in the event that you're not doing those things. For internship, students should enroll in network training programs, some is Cisco CCNA training to acclimate themselves with IT terminology. Training includes simulations of real-time IT problems professionals encounter on a daily basis. Once again, and I can read through all of them, but based on the activity, what we did was come up with different activities that staff can experience with their students. And like I said, by no means is this something that encompasses all answers, but it is something that we wanted to share with the community to see if it would be useful to you, because it's been useful to our 9 to 14 schools.
Thanks, Larry. So I just wanted to go to the chat quickly because somebody just posted a question that says, does the industry partner need to be present when they do the mock interviews, or can they give feedback on, for example, the questions asked? And that's a great question. The idea with mock interviews is that the student is getting prepared to do a real interview. And in terms of the COVID exceptions, again, there must be the sustained engagement with industry. So yes, the industry partner would need to be present. Often what we've seen in terms of mock interview examples is, you're going into a Zoom room. There are specific questions that both the student and the industry partner has been prepared with in advance. And so when the student is answering these questions in real time, then the industry partner is then able to, make a note of how well they were answering this, things that maybe they constructive critique, things they could do differently, and then be able to give that back to the student. So it's not just examples of the questions, it's also seeing how the student feels those questions and being able to use that feedback from a professional standpoint to make the student much more prepared and much more ready for the real thing. So without having that industry feedback in real time, it would be difficult for the student to know, how well they did. And I think from the industry standpoint, especially if the student is going up for an internship or some opportunity within that particular industry, it will be critical for that industry partner to give the student tips as to how they could improve answering those specific questions. So yes, I think it makes sense that the industry partner needs to be present. And for it to gain credit, yes, you would have to show that there was someone there, that there was a back and forth in terms of critique that was provided to the student post the session. So I hope that answers your question. For the person who said that they have a question about community service, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, it's me. I always have to ask questions.
Okay.
Omari has it drilled into my head that everything has to be sustainable. So now, if you can go back to that other slide, you were giving examples of community service. Our cosmetology students go to senior citizen centers and they perform services, nails and hair and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it might only be this community, this senior center. They might do in October. They might do a different place in February. It's not something that's done on a regular, reoccurring basis. Does that still count?
Well, I believe it would. It doesn't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily need to be sustained by the same industry partner, but sustained by industry in general. So if it's multiple centers, they're still interacting with professionals each time. And so the time that that is happening will be accumulating in terms of hours that you count. It would be great if you're working with the same center every time or the same professionals in that particular center. But I think if you're varying the experiences, as long as there are professionals present and they're getting that sustained engagement at the time, whether it's 2 hours or whatever the time would be, those hours would count. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. Last year, this year doesn't count because, nobody's allowed into nursing homes and senior centers now. But one other question, let me ask.
Sure.
Skills USA and HOSA, when they do like the breast cancer walk and stuff like that, could that be deemed as community service or no?
That's a great question. I think in terms of the walk itself, if the student has not necessarily been prepared post the or pre the walk with, some type of presentation or work that an industry person has done to explain, what the purpose of the walk is, maybe have them do a research project about cancer before the walk, then it just becomes an activity that happened, a one-time activity that isn't necessarily connected to the academic portion. So I think with the community service, you have to tie it back to an in-class activity that shows that it built up to the actual engagement that happened at the walk. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. It's not just a walk, it's what's involved and the background history. I got it. I understand. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Can you mind if I just for clarity? So
Sure.
I just wanted to clarify when we talked about sustained interaction. that was very specifically for the activities that generally or normally would not count as a work-based learning activity, and those sustained activities must be with the same partner. So when we're talking about that specifically, then it must be with the same partner. When we are looking at some of the things that are already accepted as a work-based learning activity, then the push for sustained activity, in essence, is removed, if that makes any sense to folks, because it's the activity itself is already accepted as a work-based learning activities. And then for your community service, as long as you can tie it into the technical skills and the CTE program itself, as opposed to just having an event where you're doing community service, then it would definitely count.
I understand what you're saying, but when I just want to clarify, like with the Skills USA and HOSA, they're all taught, they have this curriculum and it's all taught about leadership and giving back to the community. That's why I was questioning about, because the breast cancer walk is only once a year. But it makes sense. What Takia is saying is that it can't just be a walk. There's got to be more involved. How does it tie back into the classroom?
That's right.
Right? So I understand that. Thank you.
Perfect. Yep. Thanks, Takia.
Thank you, Omari. Appreciate you jumping in. So again, these are things that with your PAQ manager, if you want to kind of go back and forth, present, what it is that you're asking about, if this is something that hasn't happened yet, it's always better to get the thumbs up before you go into it, as opposed to doing something and then trying to see how you might make it fit. Because I know that that's also happening too. People have done activities and now they're hoping to go back and see how they might be able to get the credit. And it's a little bit more difficult if you hadn't checked beforehand. So appreciate you bringing this stuff up as early as possible. So we're going to try to keep moving because I know there'll be additional questions. And Larry, can you go back? Yes, thank you so much. So we have an additional document that we want to share today. It's newly created. It's basically, it's a long title. It's called How to Use, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find it myself. How to Use WBL Hours and Experiences. So I want to put it in the chat so people can see that as well. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so everybody should be able to follow along with me now. This is a document that was created by Kendall, Krisan, Jessica Kemper, if I'm not mistaken, and a few others, to really help to clarify the application of the 54 hours and just making sure that people understand where that number came from. So if you open it up and you're following along with me, you'll see on bookended on the document, we have for NYSET approved programs only. And then in the middle, we have CDOS related guidance. So the CDOS credential and CDOS pathway are also included in here. We want to make sure that we can go through this in a little bit more detail so you guys understand what the implications of this are. So the first column talks through the CTE technical endorsement and the fact that students must meet the minimum diploma requirement of 54 credits to be eligible. So that's the first thing. They need to pass 4 required region exams, ELA, math, science, and social studies. And then the students must be enrolled in a NYSET approved CTE program. This is all to be able to be eligible for the CTE technical endorsement. So if you look, the bullet points in terms of what needs to be completed are courses in the approved sequence, 7 or more credits of CTE courses that are rigorous and focused on a career. There needs to be enrollment in STARS CTE admin program through the program manager. So that needs to be documented in STARS. And then they need to participate in WBL experiences offered as a part of the approved program of study. They should pass all 3 parts of the approved technical assessments and then have a complete employability profile. This is all to be able to graduate with the Regents diploma and the technical endorsement. So just wanted to make sure that that was clear. Once we move into the CDOS credential, you recognize that there is no minimum credit requirement to be able to receive the credential for CDOS. There's no Regents exam requirement. However, they must complete the requirements in option 1 or option 2 of CDOS. And those 2 options are outlined in front of you. Option 1, complete the career plan, demonstrate the achievement of the CDOS learning standards 1, 2, and 3A. They must successfully complete at least 216 hours of CTE coursework and or WBL experiences, of which at least 54 hours must be WBL. So here we see the first mention of the 54 hours, and that's squarely within the CDOS number, which is 54 out of the 216. A student has to have 2 CDOS credits if they are going to do 108 hours of WBL. And if they have one CDOS course credit, they would need 162 hours of WBL. So basically, there's some negotiation there in terms of the coursework as compared to the actual WBL hours. And then finally, they would need to complete the employability profile. For option 2, they would need to meet the requirement for one of the nationally recognized work readiness credentials. There's no technical assessment requirement, and then the students would leave high school and exit with the credential as a standalone credential or an addition to a regents or local diploma. So hopefully that clarifies how the 54 hours interacts there within CDOS. Similarly, the CDOS pathway, different from the credential, would require students to complete 44 44 credits for the diploma. They would need to pass the 4 Regents exams, and they would also need to complete the requirements for CDOS in options 1 and 2, which I just read. There would not be a technical assessment requirement, and then students are leaving with the Regents diploma and the CDOS credential. So we try to make sure that there's a distinction there between the credential and the pathway. And then finally, the last column goes through the NYSET approved programs only, the Perkins performance indicator. And this is where I think folks had been tripped up earlier with the mention of the 54 hours. So students must have earned 4 CTE credits to be considered a CTE concentrator. And so this is the term that we're using for all of the students that are being considered moving toward the CTE endorsement at the end of their time in school. The performance indicators for annual exam performance targets, those are actually hyperlinked in the document for you. But in bold here, it says CTE concentrators in NYSET approved programs must participate in appropriate work-based learning experiences to satisfy the Perkins performance indicator and target levels of participation annually. So basically, those who are approved, those looking to become approved, must go ahead and satisfy the performance indicator. And so if you look further down, it says CTE concentrators must participate in at least 54 hours of work-based learning to demonstrate program quality for schools or programs to remain eligible for Perkins funding. So the 54 hours really comes in terms of the funding eligibility. And so it's really just pertaining to this piece right here. And then under that, it says at least 67% of CTE program participants and concentrators must participate in at least 54 hours of WBL experiences. So there is a percentage there where the target is. So hopefully it changes things a little bit. It's not an across the board 54 hours for every student, but it is an expectation as an indicator for those who are going up for approval or who have been approved to continue to maintain that Perkins funding. And so I know that was a lot. I know there might be many questions swirling at this point. So I want to open it up now for questions. And basically, if Kendall is available, I know Omari's here, you guys can get a lot more information from, as we say, the horse's mouth, if Larry and I take a step back and have PAQ really answer some specific questions that you guys might have. So for those that are comfortable unmuting, please go ahead and shout out your questions. For those that would rather do that in the chat, we will read your question. If you need any clarification, now is the time.
Hi. So I'm the one who asked about all the students in the chat. So my students are in technical theater, and our industry is obviously like not just closed, but most people aren't even available to do remote work. So can we just get a little more clarity on like in this year basically, and with the year previous, what kind of indicators will they be looking at for Perkins? Because there's no way I can provide almost 250 kids all kind of 54 hours at my school right now, or even that kind of range. It's been difficult to even place with the internships I have funded for SIF and get people to agree to that kind of where my industry is right now. So
Colleen, I'll say that as I normally do when it comes to the 54 hours, to not focus on internships if we know that that's going to be the obstacle. And so I've seen a number of our schools sort of heavily loaded on mentoring hours, which of course are work-based learning activity hours that will count. And so that's an option for you, if you're able to do some. I've seen some remote community service hours being done. I've seen some of that as well. But when we know and we get it, like this internship idea is for us, specific to the industry sector, has come to a halt for some of us. But I would definitely suggest really pushing in the other areas of work-based learning activities, so that the accumulation of 54 hours does not become an issue for you at all.
Okay.
And remember, this is throughout the whole program, right? So it's not like
Right.
this year, but throughout,
So, and under normal circumstances, I'm just trying to get an idea of year to year, kind of what are they specifically looking at? Like, just that, because that phrasing from the last column for the funding is a little vague. Under normal circumstances, most of my kids complete 200 plus hours a year in various projects. So I'm not worried about in the long scheme, just in the funding area.
Yeah, the funding will look at, again, they'll look at work-based learning as we define it, as work-based learning activities. So it sounds like you'll be absolutely fine, but definitely for anyone else who's solely focused on the internships, I strongly suggest you look at the other activities. And remember that, again, this is not per year, but through the course of their education.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. That helps.
Yep.
I have one question in the chat around where does the 4+1 fit in? And so going back to the document, how to use WBL hours, if you look at the CDOS credential, that is where the CDOS could become the +1. So if you scroll down where it says there's no minimum credit requirement, no exam, but the other requirement is to complete the requirements in option 1 or 2, and you look and you read through options 1 and 2, the hope is that students would be supplementing that WBL and CTE coursework experience as the option for one of the regents. And please correct me if I'm wrong, Omari.
That's right. That's right. So as long as you've done ELA, math, science, history, and then you need that fifth one, that fifth pathway, then you would use this as in place of that.
Thank you. Any additional questions that people want to vocalize on camera?
Kia?
Yes, thank you, Kendall.
Hello?
Yes, please go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, this Kendall, I just wanted to mention also that the 4+1 for the approved programs can also use your technical assessment as well. So for those who are worried about work-based learning and you won't be able to use the work-based learning experience in terms of the CDOS 4+1, then you can also use your technical assessment as that for those who are able to take it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have Jennifer Fitzpatrick asking at least 67%, of CTE program participants and concentrators must participate in at least 54 hours of WBL experiences. Can you confirm that this means 54 hours total over their 4-year high school career?
That is correct.
All right. So that hopefully takes some of the burden off of folks knowing that these hours can be spread across the 4-year career of students. Any other questions?
Can I say, Takia, that what that will mean for you, particularly those of you who are approved programs who are eligible for Perkins funding, is that there'll be a sort of a focused look, of course, at your seniors and ensuring that all of your seniors do have at least 54 hours of work-based learning.
And sorry, one more question. When it comes to logging hours, like I track all my own things, of course, but when it comes to adding them to CTS, is there any knowing about when we'll be able to backlog students' activities?
I don't want to give you a timeline. I've done that, and And exactly. So so I'm not sure right now.
I'll just keep my own record still and not worry about focusing on that right now. Thank you.
Perfect. Perfect. Thanks.
I thought it was said in office hours yesterday that you can only go back 100 days in entering the work-based learning activities.
Yeah, and I think Shakira's also just like there were some folks who she's going to open that door back up for them. I would definitely touch base with Shakira or your Sims manager to see what accommodations they're making.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Colleen. Any other additional questions? Don't be shy. This is a time for you to be able to have specific targeted answers to questions that have been needling you for a while. I have a Joyce Lopez in the chat. We work closely with Junior Achievement of New York and their business partners. Can they count as our industry partner as an intermediary organization?
I guess it depends on how you're working with them. So just to sort of use the name, I would say no. However, if the partner is within the industry of your program's industry sector, and again, if it's one of those that we identify where you need the sustained interaction as a, or if it's like for an internship and not, or mentoring or any of that of the accepted activities, then yes. But just to use them as a partner alone, no. If that, and I don't know if that was clear or not.
Hi, I'm going to unmute myself. Yes. Well, we do both. Like through them, like they bring in, like we've had wonderful job shadowing events with ClickSpring, which is an international company. So we do both workshops with them and with their business partners who do provide, internships and opportunities for our students. So I just wanted to know if they technically could be considered our partner because they are very helpful in securing these opportunities for us.
Yeah, Joyce, here's what I'll say to use caution. Let's say, and I'm just giving this as an example, let's say that you have a culinary arts program, you bring this group in and the partners that are working directly with your students are, let's say, business management partners. And you're going to use them to, let's say, do resume writing and cover letter writing. And you're going to do that over like a once a week for the entire month. Because they have nothing to do with the industry that you're in, then that would not count. The activity itself would not count. Now, using them to really sustain that activity, continue to do it, it's great. But if you were going to try to then count that activity towards work-based learning hours, it would not. So I just wanted to caution in that at that level.
Any other questions? I wanted to throw out a question myself and ask about STARS and tracking WBL through STARS. Can you guys say a little bit about how WBL is going to be specifically tracked outside of entering it into CTS? How do folks know that through STARS they can pull that information?
That is a work in progress. As you know, we're working with an antiquated system that we're trying to pull into this century, and just we haven't had much success, and so we're still working. But I think there is traction right now, so I do want to say that. So there is traction for us to be able to start really start adding these things both in STARS and then pulling it into the student transcripts. But we're still that's still something that we're working on.
I would say in the meantime, reach out to your academic policy point person at your field support office and follow whatever guidelines they have in place at the moment. I mean, they may be, like Mary mentioned, they'll be changing, but follow that at the moment.
Thank you. One more question in here from Jason McIntosh. If a student is verified and completes the WBL application process and is listed as such, are they automatically added to the hours dashboard in CTE tracking?
So if the student you're saying completes the I-9 verification, does the internship application for SIMS, let's say for SIF funding, are they automatically added to the hours dashboard?
And Jason, feel
That's
free
a
to
good question.
unmute if you want to clarify anything.
Yeah, so I'm having issues where the students, they complete the process. It says that they're verified, they finished the I-9 stuff. They sign off on the application forms and everything. But in the hours dashboard, they don't appear there, and I'm not able to confirm their hours, and they're not able to see that on their end either, where they should add their hours.
I think that is a pretty simple fix. Contact the SIMS manager. They're able to up that pretty quickly for you, Jason. So I think that's an easy fix for you.
Okay. Do you have the SIMS?
I hope I'm saying correctly, but I think
I've been trying to get answers to this for a minute. Do you have that SIMS personnel contact info?
What borough are you?
Brooklyn.
Is Brooklyn Danielle, I believe?
Yes, Brooklyn's Danielle.
Yes.
Jason, I'll put her email address in the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Personalized support right here. If anybody else has any specific questions, we still have some time. And we will hold the floor open for a few more minutes. Otherwise, we will give you guys back 15 minutes of your time today. Again, this session is being recorded. We're going to make sure and provide the links through the slides as well as the chat log, if you will, so you can go back and see what the questions were. And then also, if you have any additional issues, the exit ticket is going to be your go-to to let us know if we did not answer your question. So I'm going to hold the floor open for a couple more minutes to see if there are any other folks who want to unmute. We're here for you, so please use this time. You're so welcome, Patricia. All right. So in that case, I just want to thank both Omari and Kendall, as well as Tanya and folks who are part of the CTE team, piping up and answering questions. Obviously, we want to be able to make sure that you guys get the most accurate information, and it's just so wonderful to have the support of our colleagues. We want to make sure that you guys are continuing to come to these sessions. We have 2 more to go within the month of March, and then we have a new calendar coming out. So I will go ahead and pass it back to my colleague Larry to close us out.
Thanks, Zakia. So if you can, please drop the Institute survey link in the chat box. As Zakia mentioned, we encourage everyone to please fill out the exit survey. The only way we know if what we're doing and the information that we're given is accurate and if you're actually receiving something from it. The second link is, as Zakia mentioned, all of our Institute offerings up until the end of March. And the last link on the page is going to be for all the resources that we've mentioned throughout the presentation this afternoon. And on behalf of myself and Takia, and once again, thank you to Amari and Kendall. We give you back your afternoon and enjoy the rest of your day.